Welcome back to the deep dive. Looking at the calendar for this past week, we're talking February 9th, the 15th, 2026. I almost called you up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to say, hey, let's skip this week.
And why is that?
Because, honestly, on paper, absolutely nothing happened. I was doom scrolling, looking for the usual chaos we've all gotten used to.
Right.
But there was no market crash. No new war fronts, oil prices did explode. It just felt like the world finally took a breath. And I thought, what is there to even analyze here?
It's a totally fair reaction. I mean, we are so conditioned to look for the explosion, for the fire, that when we don't smell any smoke, we just assume the house is safe.
Exactly. Quiet equals safe.
But that instinct is precisely why we needed to do this. Because if you open up the MGF weekly report for week 7, the headline isn't peace and quiet, it's accumulation without explosion.
Accumulation without explosion. That sounds less like an economics report and more like a diagnosis for a really expensive engine repair.
It is, in a way. Or, think of it as a physics problem. We're using the mini-fields framework today, which asks us to just ignore the whole good news versus bad news cycle.
Okay.
And instead, look at structure. Specifically, we're looking at velocity, shear, and this thing called membrane tension. And the thesis this week is, well, it's unsettlingly simple. This wasn't a week where nothing happened.
Is what then?
It was a week where everything hardened.
Hardened.
Yeah, think of a pressurized tank. Just because the needle on the gauge isn't shaking like crazy, it doesn't mean the pressure inside isn't rising. It might just mean the tank itself is expanding to hold it all in. The real danger isn't the noise, it's the silence right before the metal snaps.
Okay, that's a vivid image. So our mission today is to basically put a stethoscope up to that tank and listen to what's going on inside.
That's it.
So where do we even start looking for this silent pressure in a week that was so, well, boring?
We have to start with the concept of shear. In geology, shear is what happens when you have two tectonic plates rubbing against each other, moving at totally different speeds.
And in 2026, we have two economic plates doing that. You're talking about the velocity gap from the report.
Right. On one side, you've got what the report calls the financial OS, the operating system of global capital. And this isn't just the stock market ticking up and down.
No.
This is the digital layer of value. High-speed algorithms, AI trading models, just massive, massive liquidity flows.
And that layer is moving incredibly fast.
It's moving at Mach 10. It is almost frictionless. It's front-running the future. It's pricing in earnings for 2030, reacting to data in microseconds. It's just detached from the real world.
Which brings us to the second plate. The real economy.
Exactly. The physical world, moving shipping containers, manufacturing steel, buying groceries, negotiating wages. That layer is heavy. It has friction. It's sluggish.
So the financial OS is trying to drag the real economy forward at, 100 miles an hour?
While the real economy is completely stuck in the mud, and that creates heat, the report notes that the financial layer is screaming, efficiency, growth.ai.
While the consumer layer is saying,
my paycheck hasn't moved an inch, logistics are still a mess, and everything costs too much.
But hold on, I want to push back on this a little. We've had a disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street for years, right?
Yeah.
That's not exactly a new thing. Why does the report flag it now as being so critical?
It's the width of the gap. That's the shear issue. Usually there's a kind of rubber band effect. Eventually the economy catches up, or the market corrects down to meet reality.
And right now,
neither is happening. They are just stretching further and further apart. The financial OS just assumes the real world can handle its math.
And if it can't,
then you get a snap. If the consumer just stops participating because they're mathematically priced out of this whole growth narrative, the correction isn't a gentle slope, it's a cliff.
That's the shear zone they talk about.
Exactly. No fire yet, but the friction is building up some immense heat.
It's interesting you mentioned heat without fire. That really does seem to be the theme here. Let's pivot to the second layer of this silent pressure.
Okay.
We talked about money. Now let's talk about the world stage. Geopolitics. The report mentions Ukraine and the Middle East, which are, they're obviously still huge flashpoints.
They are. But did you notice something strange about your own reaction to the news this week?
Well, like I said at the start, I barely noticed it. And that's weird, isn't it? Because the situation on the ground, it hasn't actually gotten any better.
No, it hasn't. The tensions are still historically high. But the reaction from markets, even from the public, is described in the report as muted.
So we're just ignoring it.
Not ignoring, hardening. The report uses the term calcification. It's a psychological hardening of what they call the narrative layer.
Like a callus on your hand.
That's a perfect analogy. At first, friction hurts, but if you keep rubbing it, the skin gets hard and numb. You stop feeling the friction, but the damage is still being done underneath.
That makes a lot of sense. We've been hearing about escalation for so long that escalation just sounds like background noise now.
Exactly, and that is so dangerous. We have a disconnect here too. The OS layer, so the military and defense sectors, they're accelerating. They're using AI, new strategies, moving at war logic speed.
But the narrative layer?
The public is fatigued. We have gotten used to the tension.
I have to ask, though, isn't it better if we aren't all panicking every single day? I mean, if I'm just trying to live my life, numbness feels a lot like stability. Isn't keeping calm and carrying on supposed to be a good thing?
In the short term, maybe for your personal blood pressure, sure, but systemically, it's incredibly dangerous. The report calls it a compatibility error.
A compatibility error. Why?
Because military rationality and daily life sensation are no longer connected. If a major escalation does happen, a true black swan event, the public has zero psychological buffer left. We're not prepared. We've tuned out.
So when the reaction finally comes?
It won't be linear. It will be a shock, a snap. Because the membrane of our psychological resilience has become totally brittle.
It's like the boy who cried wolf, but the wolf is actually there eating the sheep. And all the villagers are just like, yeah, wolves eat sheep. Tell me something new.
And then the wolf knocks on their door, and they are completely paralyzed because they normalize the threat instead of preparing for it. That is the very definition of brittle.
That is a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at something a bit more tangible. The data. The report points to these micro vibrations in energy and currency.
Right.
Specifically crude oil and the yen-dollar exchange rate.
Yep. And again, looking at the week of Feb 9th to 15th, no massive spikes. Oil didn't double. The yen didn't collapse overnight. But what you did see were sustained micro movements.
Sustained micro movements. It just sounds like a polite way of saying a nagging pain.
It is. I mean, look at the yen. It's hovering in a range that is incredibly painful for anyone importing goods, but it's not volatile enough to trigger a big central bank intervention.
It's the death by 1,000 cut zone.
That's exactly it. And oil.
Same story.
Same story. Prices aren't exploding, but they are persistently uncomfortable. They're sitting at a floor that just grinds away at your wallet, but not fast enough to make you riot.
And the report says the consumer reaction to this is resignation.
Oh, I guess this is just what life costs now reaction.
I guess this is what gas costs. I guess this is what my commute costs.
Yeah. And this adaptation is a form of silent stress. It's insidious. An explosion in price, that provokes a reaction. People demand policy changes. They change their habits drastically.
But this slow creep.
It just infiltrates the psychology of the life layer. It creates a delayed reaction function. We're absorbing the cost, absorbing the stress, and just carrying it.
And that adds to the brittleness we were talking about.
Of course. You can only carry so much dead weight before your knees buckle. The report notes that the structural integrity of the household balance sheet is degrading, even if spending numbers look okay on the surface.
Because people are using credit to mask the pain.
To mask the pain?
Exactly. This all leads to what I think is the most fascinating and maybe the most concerning part of this deep dive, the silence detection.
Right.
Usually we're looking for what is making noise. But this report, you're asking us to listen for what's not making noise.
That's the core technique for a week like this. In a really complex system, silence is often more informative than noise. According to MGF, there are zones that are too quiet.
And those are?
Local economies, SME financing, that's small and medium enterprises, and household anxiety about the future.
But why are they quiet? If things are that tough, shouldn't they be loud? Shouldn't small business owners be screaming for help?
In a healthy fighting system, yes, they'd be vocal. The fact that they're silent suggests something much, much darker.
Which is what?
The report suggests they might be shrinking or in a state of giving up.
That's a heavy implication. You're saying the silence isn't resilience, it's atrophy.
It's necrosis. It's tissue dying. If you're a small business owner and you've been fighting inflation, labor shortages, and high interest rates for 3 years, eventually you just stop complaining.
You quietly close the shop.
You quietly close up. Or you quietly cut your own salary to zero just to keep the lights on. That silence isn't peace. It's the sound of economic tissue dying.
And the report actually puts a number on this, the membrane tension score.
They do. It's a subjective score, but it's useful. For this week, they rate it at 0.57.
0.57 out of 1.0. Help me contextualize that. Is that a run for the hills number? Because it feels kind of middle of the road.
It is labeled as medium continuous pressure, so it's not an explosion warning, it's not a red alert where the gauge is at point 0.9, but it's way above zero. It signals sustained pressure. But here's the key takeaway for you listening. That number defines elasticity.
How much stretch you have left.
Exactly. At 0.57, the system has lost its ability to absorb a shock. If we get a sudden geopolitical event or a sudden financial spike, the membrane is just too tight to stretch anymore. It'll pop.
And this highlights that gap we keep coming back to. The report mentions a widening gap between the controlled domain and the uncontrolled domain.
This is the structural summary of the whole week. The controlled domain, that's policy, finance, the stuff governments can manipulate with interest rates and laws, it looks stable. They have their hands on the levers.
They're driving the car, the steering wheel works.
Right. But the uncontrolled domain psychology, demographics, the mood of the people is silently degrading. The engine block is rusting out from the inside.
So the government is confident because all the dashboard lights are green.
But the passengers in the back seat have stopped talking because they're getting motion sick. That's the situation.
So what does this all mean for next week? If we accept that this week was about accumulation without explosion, what are the watch points for week 8? What should we be looking for to see if this membrane finally breaks?
The report gives us a very clear list of triggers. We need to watch to see if all this stored pressure finds a release valve. First, volatility. Watch the yen-dollar exchange rate. If that volatility expands, if those micro vibrations become macro tremors, it means the central banks have lost the handle.
Got it. So if the currency starts jumping, the controlled domain is failing. What else?
Second, direction. Crude oil has been hovering. Look for a clear directional change. If it breaks out of its range, up or down in a big way, that could be the catalyst that wakes up the consumer from their resignation.
And on the geopolitical front?
Localized expansion. Don't just look for general tension or rhetoric. Watch Ukraine and the Middle East for a specific tangible expansion of the conflict zone, a new front, a new type of weapon being used.
Something that punctures the public's apathy.
Something that forces the narrative layer to wake up and realize the wolf is really at the door.
Exactly.
And finally, domestic. Watch for news from local economies or Japanese consumption indices. If that silence breaks, if we start seeing headlines about bankruptcies or a sudden drop in spending,
that means the giving up phase is now becoming visible.
Right. Any movement in these areas could shift us from this phase of accumulation into a phase of action. The pressure has been stored. The question for next week is, does it stay stored or does it find a release?
And I'm guessing the release isn't gentle?
When pressure has been building this silently for this long, the release valve is rarely a hiss, it's a pop.
Yeah, I started this whole deep dive thinking about how boring the news was. Great, I thought, a week off from the chaos.
Yeah.
But now I'm realizing the chaos was just holding its breath.
And that's the goal of these deep dives, right? To see the structure, not just the surface. We often look for the needle that pops the balloon. We obsess over the needle. Is it a war? Is it a bank failure? But this week teaches us to look at the balloon itself.
Is the rubber getting harder? Is it getting more brittle?
Exactly. Because if the balloon is brittle enough, if that tension score climbs any higher, you don't even need a needle. It just pops on its own.
Well, on that cheery note, thank you for making a quiet week sound absolutely incredibly tense. But seriously, it's a crucial perspective. It's so easy to be lulled to sleep when the headlines are calm.
The quietest weeks are sometimes the most important to watch. That's really the takeaway.
There you have it, the sound of silent pressure.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes on those watch points and don't mistake silence for safety. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.
Stay curious.